The glass conference room felt like a fishbowl. Everyone was staring at me, but no one really saw me. Martin Hale stood at the head of the table, his smile too wide, his voice too cheerful. I'm thrilled to announce that Chloe Reynolds will be taking over as our new operations lead, effective immediately. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. The room tilted slightly. Chloe, the 22-year-old intern I'd spent 3 months training, beamed from across the table. She wore a designer blazer I couldn't afford and confidence she hadn't earned. Applause erupted around me. Cameras flashed for the company newsletter. I felt my face freeze into something that might have looked like a smile but felt more like a mask cracking. Erin has done tremendous work getting us here, Martin continued, his hand gesturing vaguely in my direction. But it's time for some fresh energy. New blood. You understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that loyalty meant nothing. I understood that saving a dying company from bankruptcy didn't guarantee job security. I understood that being 31 and competent was somehow less valuable than being 22 and connected. Chloe slid into my chair, literally my chair, the one I'd sat in for 3 years, and everyone acted like this was normal. Like this was fair. My hands trembled as I set down my cup. The coffee had gone cold anyway. My name is Erin Walsh, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I had a future at Hale & Company. I was wrong about a lot of things. I was wrong to believe that hard work mattered. Wrong to think that results spoke louder than relationships. Wrong to assume that pulling a company back from the edge of destruction would earn me anything more than a polite dismissal. 3 years ago, I walked into this office as a junior analyst. The company was bleeding money faster than Martin could make excuses. Vendors were threatening lawsuits. Clients were canceling contracts. The entire staff whispered about layoffs in the break room. I was 28 then, fresh from business school, desperate to prove myself. I took on projects no one else wanted. I stayed late when everyone else went home. I lived on coffee and determination, convinced that success was just around the corner if I worked hard enough. Martin noticed me eventually. You're a real lifesaver, Erin, he'd say, patting my shoulder before disappearing into another meeting where he'd take credit for my solutions. I told myself it didn't matter who got the glory as long as the company survived. That was my first mistake. Thinking survival was the goal. Success has 100 fathers, but failure is an orphan. I'd saved the company from becoming an orphan, and now I was the one being abandoned. The crisis started 18 months ago, though Martin blamed it on market trends and bad luck. I knew better. I'd spent weeks analyzing the numbers, tracing every dollar that flowed through the company. The problem wasn't the market. It was management. Martin had signed contracts without reading the fine print. He'd hired expensive consultants who produced glossy reports and zero results. He'd made promises to clients we couldn't keep, then acted surprised when they demanded refunds. The night I discovered how bad things really were, I stayed in the office until 3 a.m. The cleaning crew found me asleep at my desk, surrounded by printouts and cold pizza. The numbers didn't lie. We had maybe 6 months before bankruptcy. I could have looked for another job. Most people would have. Instead, I drafted a restructuring plan. I renegotiated vendor contracts, cutting costs without sacrificing quality. I reached out to former clients, rebuilding bridges Martin had burned with his arrogance. It took 6 months of brutal work, but slowly, the company stabilized. Profits started climbing. New contracts came in. The whispers in the break room changed from "when will we close?" to "how did we turn things around?" Martin never asked me how. He just accepted the turnaround as proof of his own leadership and moved on to planning his next big expansion. The turnaround was complete by last spring. Revenue had doubled. We'd hired back the staff we'd laid off. Martin started talking about opening a second office, maybe even going public someday. The board called it a miracle. Martin called it vision. I called it exhausting. Every success felt like pushing a boulder uphill, knowing Martin would claim he'd been pushing all along. In meetings, he'd present my strategies as his own ideas. As I was telling Erin the other day, he'd begin, describing plans I'd created from scratch while he was playing golf. My coworkers knew the truth. They saw me working weekends while Martin posted vacation photos from the Bahamas. They heard him take credit during board presentations, watched him collect bonuses for exceptional leadership. But knowing the truth and speaking it are different things. No one wanted to risk their job by pointing out that the emperor had no clothes. So they congratulated Martin, thanked me privately, and we all pretended everything was normal. I thought if I just kept working, kept delivering results, eventually I'd get my moment. A promotion. Recognition. Something to prove that my sacrifice had been worth it. Instead, I got Chloe. Fresh out of college, majoring in marketing and overconfidence, she'd waltzed into the office 3 months ago with connections instead of credentials. Martin introduced her as his niece, though he swore that wouldn't affect how she was treated. Chloe's first day should have been my warning. She arrived wearing heels that cost more than my monthly car payment and carrying confidence like a designer handbag. Martin practically glowed with pride as he introduced her around the office. "This is Chloe Reynolds, my sister's daughter," he announced during the morning meeting. "She's joining us as an intern, but I expect great things from her. Real leadership potential. I was assigned to train her." "Show her the ropes," Martin said. "Teach her everything you know." Looking back, I realize he meant that literally. He wanted me to give her my playbook so she could replace me. But I didn't see it then. I was too busy being professional, being helpful, being the team player Martin always praised me for being. I spent hours explaining our systems, walking Chloe through client relationships I'd built from scratch, sharing strategies I'd developed through trial and error. She smiled and took notes, asked questions that seemed thoughtful, and laughed at Martin's jokes in meetings. She was charming and quick and completely unqualified for anything beyond fetching coffee. Within a week, she was sitting in on client calls. Within 2 weeks, she was presenting my work as collaborative efforts. By week 3, Martin was asking her opinion in meetings while I sat silent, watching my authority evaporate. The other employees noticed. Some sympathized. Most stayed quiet. Office politics are a survival game, and backing the wrong person can be career suicide. The shift happened gradually, then suddenly. First, a few emails got rerouted to Chloe instead of me. "She needs to learn the client relationships," Martin explained. Then projects I'd been leading became team efforts with Chloe's name listed first. "You're not really a leader, Erin," Martin told me one afternoon, his voice casual as if he was commenting on the weather. "You're more of a doer. Someone who executes. Chloe has that spark, that vision. You understand." I understood that 3 years of saving his company meant nothing compared to 3 weeks of being related to him. I understood that nepotism had won over merit so completely that he didn't even bother hiding it anymore. That night, I stayed late fixing a presentation Martin had butchered. He'd promised the client a proposal by morning, then realized at 5 o'clock he'd forgotten half the data. Rather than admit his mistake, he dumped it on my desk with a note, "Handle this." I spent 4 hours rebuilding his mess, double-checking numbers, crafting a narrative that would convince the client we were competent despite evidence to the contrary. At midnight, I sent the finished presentation to Martin. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. The next morning, he thanked Chloe in front of everyone for saving the day with her brilliant work. She accepted his praise with a modest smile. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. The breaking point came 2 weeks later during the Brennan Industries pitch. It was our biggest potential contract of the year, worth $2.4 million over 3 years. I'd spent a month preparing, analyzing their needs, crafting a proposal that addressed every concern they'd raised. The morning of the presentation, Martin called me into his office. "I'm putting Chloe on point for this one," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "She needs the experience." "She's been here 2 months, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She doesn't know the client history, the pricing structure, or—" "She'll have you there to support her," Martin interrupted. "Think of it as mentoring. You're good at that." The presentation was a disaster. Chloe forgot key details, mixed up numbers, and froze when the client asked technical questions. I stepped in, improvising answers, salvaging what I could while Martin watched from the back of the room. Somehow we closed the deal. The client signed based on the written proposal I'd crafted and the verbal promises I'd made to fix the presentation's mistakes. It was a win built entirely on my work, my relationships, and my ability to think fast under pressure. The next morning, an email went out to the entire company. "Congratulations to Chloe Reynolds for her brilliant leadership in securing the Brennan Industries contract." That's when I started documenting everything. Every email, every project, every original strategy and solution. I created backup files, saved them to personal drives, and began building a record of exactly what I'd created versus what Martin claimed. The end came on a Tuesday morning in early October. Martin called me into his office with HR present. I knew before sitting down what was happening. You don't bring HR to meetings that end well. We're restructuring the operations department, he began, using the passive voice like the decision had made itself. It's not personal, Aaron. It's just business. The company needs to move in a new direction, and frankly, that direction requires different leadership. I stared at the framed Team Player of the Year certificate on his wall. He'd given it to me last Christmas, right after I'd worked through the holidays to finalize a merger he'd nearly destroyed with his incompetence. We're offering a generous severance package, the HR representative said, sliding papers across the desk. 3 months of salary, continued health insurance through the end of the year, and a positive reference for future employment. How generous, I said quietly. My hands were steady as I picked up the pen. Some part of me wanted to scream, to flip the desk, to finally tell Martin exactly what I thought of his leadership. But I'd spent 3 years being professional. Might as well finish strong. I signed the papers, smiled politely, and walked out. Martin looked relieved. He probably thought it was over, that I'd quietly disappear like so many other employees he'd chewed up and discarded. He was wrong. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The walk from Martin's office to my desk felt endless. Co-workers suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Avoiding eye contact like unemployment might be contagious. A few brave souls mouthed, "I'm sorry," when Martin wasn't looking. No one spoke out loud. Human resources provided a cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate rejection. I packed slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone saw that I wasn't crying, wasn't breaking down, wasn't giving them the emotional scene they probably expected. Chloe appeared as I was clearing my desk. "Hey, I just heard," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "No hard feelings, right? It's just business." I looked at her standing there in my office, wearing the success I'd built like it was a costume she'd purchased. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just stared until she shifted uncomfortably and walked away. My silence said more than words could have. Later, a coworker told me Chloe had complained to Martin that I'd made her feel uncomfortable during my exit. The irony was almost funny. I carried my box to the parking lot, loaded it into my car, and drove home in the middle of the workday for the first time in 3 years. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty, too full of the failure I was trying not to acknowledge. That night, I pulled out my laptop and the backup drive containing every document, strategy, and system I'd created for Hale and Company. I'd built his empire. Now I'd build my own. The first week after leaving was brutal. I slept until noon, drank wine at 3 in the afternoon, and ignored calls from concerned friends who'd heard through the office gossip network what had happened. I needed time to spiral before I could rise. But reality has a way of intruding. Bills don't stop arriving just because you've been fired. Neither does ambition, apparently. On day 8 of my unemployment, I was scrolling through news feeds when I saw it. Hale and Company announces major expansion under new leadership. The article featured a photo of Martin and Chloe standing in front of architectural renderings of a new office. The expansion plan was mine. Every detail lifted from the proposal I'd drafted 6 months earlier. They'd even kept my original timeline. My stomach twisted with rage so pure it was almost clarifying. They hadn't just replaced me. They'd stolen my roadmap for the future and claimed it as their own. I read the article 3 times, memorizing every detail. Martin was quoted extensively, discussing his vision for growth. Chloe was described as the brilliant young mind driving innovation. My name appeared once, in the final paragraph. Former operations lead Aaron Walsh recently departed to pursue other opportunities. That final sentence snapped something into place. Other opportunities. Fine. I'd create opportunities they couldn't imagine. I'd build something so successful that everyone would know the truth. Martin Hale was a fraud riding on borrowed talent, and that talent was mine. The phone call came on a Friday afternoon. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, and I'd been avoiding anything that felt like real human interaction. But something made me pick up. Aaron Walsh. The voice was familiar. "This is Kevin Brennan from Brennan Industries. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Kevin Brennan. The $2.4 million contract. The pitch Chloe had botched and I'd saved. Not at all. I said, suddenly alert. What can I do for you? Well, that's the thing. You're not with Hale and Company anymore, are you? He didn't wait for confirmation. We've been trying to implement the system you proposed, and frankly, your replacement doesn't understand her own plan. She can't answer basic questions about the infrastructure you designed. I smiled for the first time in days. That's because she didn't design it. I did. I suspected as much. Kevin paused. Look, I'm not supposed to interfere with a vendor's internal staffing, but you made that deal happen. If you're available for consulting work, we'd pay well. We need someone who actually knows what they're doing. One call turned into 3 clients in 2 weeks. Word spread quickly in the industry. Aaron Walsh was available, talented, and no longer constrained by Martin Hale's incompetence. That night, I registered a business name with the state. Walsh Consulting. My new life had begun. I started Walsh Consulting from my apartment with a second-hand desk from Craigslist and a determination bordering on obsession. The overhead was minimal. Just me, my laptop, and 3 years of expertise Martin had assumed belonged to him. The first month was chaos. I worked 16-hour days, rebuilding systems I'd already built once for Hale and Company, but better this time. No bureaucracy, no incompetent boss changing specifications on a whim, no credit-stealing intern hovering nearby. Clients loved the transparency. I answered my own phone. I delivered on time. I didn't promise things I couldn't deliver or blame market conditions when I made mistakes. It was a revolutionary concept apparently. Just being competent and honest. By the end of month 2, I had 7 active clients and a waiting list. The Brennan Industries referral had started a chain reaction. Business owners talk to each other, especially when they find someone who actually solves problems instead of creating them. I hired my first employee in month 3. Marcus Chen, a brilliant analyst who'd quit Hale and Company the week after I was fired. Martin's an idiot, Marcus said during his interview. I stayed as long as you were there to run interference. Once you left, there was no point. 2 more former co-workers followed Marcus within a month. The Whisper network was working in my favor now. Everyone who'd watched Martin take credit for my work, everyone who'd seen Chloe promoted over merit, they were all paying attention to what came next. My first major win came 4 months after starting Walsh Consulting. Titanium Solutions, a client Hale and Company had lost 2 years earlier due to Martin's arrogance, reached out asking if I could help rebuild their accounting infrastructure. We worked with your former company, the CEO told me over lunch. Absolute disaster. The consultant they sent, your old boss actually, spent more time talking about his golf game than our actual needs. When things went wrong, he blamed our staff. That sounds like Martin, I said carefully, not wanting to seem bitter even though I absolutely was. We eventually fired them and fixed the problems ourselves badly. She leaned forward. But we've been following your new firm. People say you're the one who actually knew what you were doing. So here's my question. Can you fix what they broke? I could. I did. And I did it for a fraction of what Martin would have charged while delivering 3 times the value. The contract was worth $600,000. More than I'd made in an entire year at Hale and Company. When the project finished ahead of schedule and under budget, Titanium Solutions sent a company-wide email praising Walsh Consulting. They copied their entire professional network, including several of Martin's current clients. My phone didn't stop ringing for a week. Success, I was learning, tasted like quiet vindication served cold. The Whisper network accelerated rapidly. By month 6, I'd hired 8 employees, all refugees from Martin's toxic management style. They brought inside knowledge of Hale and Company's weaknesses, client frustrations, and upcoming contract renewals. He's panicking, my former co-worker Aisha told me over coffee. She just resigned from Hale and Company to join Walsh Consulting. Martin's losing clients left and right. Everyone's asking for you specifically, and Chloe can't handle the workload. She literally cried in a meeting last week. I should have felt guilty. I didn't. What's Martin saying? That you're sabotaging him. That you stole client lists and proprietary information. Aisha rolled her eyes. HR investigated, found nothing because there's nothing to find. You're just better at the job than he ever was, and people figured it out. The accusations actually helped me. Every time Martin claimed I'd stolen something, I'd release public documentation proving I'd created it from scratch. Every angry email he sent to mutual contacts made him look petty and desperate while I stayed calm and professional. By the end of month 6, Walsh Consulting had surpassed Hale and Company in monthly revenue. I'd hired a proper office space downtown, established a professional website, and started getting calls from companies that had never heard of Martin at all. I was no longer defined by what he'd done to me. I was building something entirely my own, and it was magnificent. The text arrived late on a Tuesday night. Unknown number, but the message was clear enough. He's losing it. Today he screamed at Chloe in front of everyone. Blamed you for stealing his business. Thought you should know. A friend. I sat in my new office, looking at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows I could suddenly afford, and felt something shift. Not guilt. Martin had earned every misfortune coming his way. But maybe satisfaction. Maybe completion. The next morning, I got the email I'd been half expecting. Martin had sent a mass message to our shared professional contacts claiming I'd violated my non-compete agreement and stolen proprietary data. The accusations were serious enough to damage my reputation if anyone believed them. I called my lawyer. Do we have grounds to sue for defamation? Absolutely, she said. But there's a better approach. Let's respond publicly with documentation proving everything you've built was created after you left his company. Make him look foolish, not criminal. The response went out that afternoon. A detailed timeline of Walsh Consulting's formation, including dated documents showing that every client relationship had been initiated after my departure. I attached testimonials from clients praising my original work, emails proving I'd created the systems Martin claimed were his, and a very polite note suggesting he focus on his own business rather than slandering mine. 3 of his clients forwarded my response back to him with a simple question. Is this true? Martin never publicly responded. His silence was an admission. Walsh Consulting's growth became exponential. Industry publications started covering the story, not as a revenge tale, but as a business success story. Former employee builds empire after controversial exit, read one headline. Another called me, the consultant who turned rejection into revenue. Reporters wanted interviews. I declined most of them, preferring to let my work speak for itself. But when Business Chronicle called asking for a profile piece, I agreed with one condition. They had to cover both Walsh Consulting and Hale and Company fairly. We're interested in the truth, the journalist assured me. Not a hit piece. The interview took 3 hours. I told the whole story, the turnaround I'd engineered, the credit Martin had taken, the nepotistic replacement with Chloe, and the subsequent success of my own firm. I kept my tone professional, factual, almost boring. I didn't need to embellish. The facts were damning enough. The journalist also interviewed Martin. According to my sources, he'd ranted for an hour about disloyal employees and market manipulation, digging himself deeper with every defensive word. The article published on a Monday morning with dueling headlines, Walsh Consulting. How one woman turned dismissal into industry dominance, next to Hale and Company faces exodus of talent and clients. My phone exploded with calls. Investors, potential clients, even a book publisher asking if I'd considered writing about my experience. Martin's office, according to the Whisper Network, descended into chaos. Chloe reportedly stopped showing up for work. The breaking point for Hale and Company came 7 months after my departure. 3 major clients simultaneously announced they were moving their contracts to Walsh Consulting. The combined value was over $4 million, nearly half of Martin's annual revenue. One of those clients called to personally explain their decision. We stayed with Hale out of loyalty and history, the CFO told me. But your former boss has spent more time complaining about you than servicing our account. Meanwhile, everyone who's moved to your firm raves about the service. It's not a difficult choice. Martin tried to counter. He slashed prices, threw bonuses at remaining clients, and made promises his depleted staff couldn't keep. But desperation smells like failure, and businesses avoid failure like a disease. The industry trade publication reported that Hale and Company had lost 6 major contracts in 2 months. The article speculated about possible bankruptcy or acquisition. Martin issued a statement blaming market conditions and unfair competition. No one believed him. I didn't gloat. There was no victory in watching someone self-destruct, even someone who deserved it. But I also didn't intervene or offer help. Martin had made his choices. These were his consequences. Meanwhile, Walsh Consulting continued expanding. I'd hired 23 people now, including 2 executives from Fortune 500 companies who saw potential in what we were building. My focus shifted from survival to strategy, from proving Martin wrong to building something that would outlast us both. The acquisition offer came from Precision Dynamic, a national consulting firm looking to expand into our region. Their CEO, Patricia Alvarez, flew in personally to discuss terms. "We've been watching your growth," she said over lunch at the city's most expensive restaurant. 15 months from startup to $7 million in annual revenue is remarkable. Your client retention rate is 97%. That's unheard of in this industry. "We focus on actually solving problems," I said. "Novel concept, apparently." Patricia laughed. "I've read about your history with Hale and Company. For what it's worth, their loss was our gain. We're not interested in acquiring them. Too much baggage, too much mismanagement. But you've built something special." The offer was generous. A buyout that would make me wealthy, plus a 5-year contract as a regional director with significant autonomy. I'd keep my team, my clients, and my methods. I'd just have the resources of a national firm backing me. I asked for a week to consider. That night, I called a meeting with my senior staff, the people who'd taken a chance on a startup led by a woman Martin Hale had deemed not leadership material. "I want your honest opinion," I told them. "Is this the right move?" Marcus spoke first. "You built this to prove you could succeed without him. You've done that. Now the question is, what do you want to build next?" I turned down the acquisition offer. The money was tempting, but Walsh Consulting was more than a business now. It was proof that merit matters, that talent will find its way, that betting on yourself can pay dividends beyond money. "I appreciate the offer," I told Patricia. "But we're building something here that I'm not ready to let go of. Maybe in a few years, when we're even bigger." She smiled. "I respect that. Keep my number. When you're ready to think bigger than regional dominance, call me." Instead of selling, I doubled down on growth. We opened a second office in the neighboring state. I started a mentorship program for young consultants, especially women trying to break into male-dominated industries. I published articles about management, ethics, and the real cost of nepotism in business. My profile continued rising. Speaking invitations came from conferences and universities. A major business school asked me to guest lecture on entrepreneurship and ethical leadership. Every appearance, every article, every success was another nail in Martin's coffin. Not because I was trying to hurt him, but because I'd simply moved beyond him. Hale and Company, meanwhile, had shrunk to a quarter of its former size. Chloe had left, reportedly moving to California to find herself. Martin was running the company alone, unable to retain employees or attract new clients. The Whisper Network reported he'd become bitter and isolated, blaming everyone but himself for the collapse of what I'd built and he destroyed. The final confrontation came at an industry conference 14 months after my departure from Hale and Company. I was delivering a keynote speech on sustainable business growth when I saw him in the back of the auditorium. Martin looked older than I remembered. Diminished somehow. He watched my presentation with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger, maybe, or regret. When I finished a standing ovation, he stayed seated. I considered avoiding him. It would have been easy to slip out the side door, let security handle any confrontation. But I'd spent 3 years being afraid of Martin's moods, his ego, his ability to control my career. I wasn't afraid anymore. I walked straight to him. "Martin. Erin." He stood, looking uncomfortable. "Hell of a speech. Very inspiring. Thank you. I suppose you're happy now. Watching my company fall apart." I met his eyes steadily. "Your company fell apart because you replaced competence with nepotism. Because you took credit for work you didn't do. Because you thought success was about who you knew rather than what you could build." He flinched. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair. I saved your company once. You threw me away like I was disposable. So I built something better, and you're angry that I succeeded without you." I kept my voice calm, factual. "The question you should be asking isn't why I'm successful. It's why you failed." Martin opened his mouth to respond, but I'd already turned away. I had a meeting with a potential client worth more than his entire annual revenue. I had employees depending on me. I had a future I'd built with my own hands. His past was no longer my problem. The conference was a turning point. 3 more clients signed with Walsh Consulting that week, 2 of them specifically citing my keynote as the reason they'd chosen us. The industry recognized what Martin never had. I wasn't just competent. I was exceptional. A month later, Business Chronicle published their annual 30 Under 35 issue featuring the most influential young business leaders in the region. My photo appeared on the cover with the headline, "From Fired to Phenomenal: How Erin Walsh Redefined Success." The article was comprehensive and fair. It covered my work at Hale & Company, the controversial dismissal, and the subsequent creation of Walsh Consulting. It included quotes from clients praising my integrity, from employees celebrating the company culture I'd created, and even from Patricia Alvarez discussing the acquisition offer I'd turned down. The article mentioned Martin only briefly. Former employer Hale & Company declined to comment for this story. The firm has experienced significant client losses and staff turnover in recent months. That final paragraph said everything that needed saying. He'd been reduced to a footnote in my success story. 6 months after the conference confrontation, I received an unexpected email. The sender, Chloe Reynolds. "Dear Erin," it began. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I've spent the past year reflecting on what happened at Hale & Company, and I owe you an apology. I almost deleted it. But curiosity won out. I was 22 and stupid," the email continued. "Uncle Martin convinced me I deserved the promotion, that I'd earned it somehow. I believed him because it was easier than admitting I was unqualified. I watched you work miracles and convinced myself I could do the same thing. I couldn't. The job destroyed me. I had panic attacks before every client meeting. I cried in the bathroom daily. I quit 6 months after you left because I finally understood what you'd been doing all along. Everything. And I'd taken credit for work I could never reproduce. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just saying I'm sorry. You deserved better. The company deserved better. I was a spoiled kid playing at being an adult, and people like you paid the price. For what it's worth, I'm back in school now, studying something I'm actually good at. And I tell everyone who asks about my brief business career the truth. I wasn't ready. I was promoted because of nepotism, and it was wrong. I hope you're doing well. From what I read, you're doing incredible. Chloe." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a response. "Chloe," I wrote back. "Thank you for the apology. It took courage to send, and I appreciate it. You were young, and Martin manipulated the situation for his own ego. You're not entirely blameless, but you're not the villain either. I'm glad you're finding your path. That's more than Martin ever did. Erin." Her response came minutes later. "Thank you for not hating me. I hated myself enough for both of us. P.S. Uncle Martin asks about you sometimes. I think he finally understands what he lost." I didn't respond to that. Martin's regrets weren't my concern anymore. I'd moved so far beyond Hale & Company that looking back felt like staring at a different life entirely. Walsh Consulting continued growing. We hit $10 million in annual revenue in our second year. I promoted Marcus to Chief Operations Officer. We won industry awards for client satisfaction, workplace culture, and innovation. Every success felt earned rather than stolen, built on merit rather than connections. I started getting calls from other fired employees, people who'd been dismissed despite strong performance, asking how I'd done it. I helped where I could, offering advice and sometimes even seed funding for their own ventures. One woman told me, "You made revenge look like success." I corrected her. I made success look like moving on. There's a difference. Revenge requires dwelling on the past, on what was done to you. Success requires building a future that proves the past wrong without needing to mention it at all. 2 years after leaving Hale & Company, I received an invitation to speak at the Regional Business Excellence Awards. When I arrived, I discovered I'd been nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year. I won. The award ceremony felt surreal. Standing on stage accepting recognition from the same business community that had watched me get fired and said nothing. In the audience I spotted former Hale & Company clients, competitors, and one face I didn't expect, Martin Hale. He sat near the back, clapping politely when my name was called. Our eyes met for a moment. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement or maybe an apology. I nodded back, then turned my attention to the present moment. My acceptance speech was brief. 2 years ago, I lost a job I thought defined me. It turned out that job had been holding me back. I've learned that our value isn't determined by who employs us or who believes in us. It's determined by what we build when no one's watching, what we create when we're told we can't. This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every person who took a chance on Walsh Consulting when we were just an angry woman with a laptop and a dream. It belongs to clients who valued competence over connections. It belongs to employees who chose culture over convenience. But mostly, it belongs to anyone who's ever been told they're not good enough. You are. Build something that proves it. The standing ovation lasted longer than my speech. The final chapter of this story is still being written, but I can tell you where I am now. Walsh Consulting employs 43 people across 3 offices. We're on track to hit $15 million in revenue this year. I've been profiled in Forbes, invited to speak at Harvard Business School, and offered board positions at companies worth more than Martin ever dreamed of building. Last month, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting from 3 years of reading Martin's notes scribbled on documents I'd created. Inside was a single sentence. You were right about everything. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter, and some victories don't require acknowledgement from the people who doubted you. Martin's opinion of me, good or bad, had stopped mattering the day I signed my severance papers and walked out of his office. What matters now is the intern who joined Walsh Consulting last month, nervous and eager to prove herself. I remember being that person once. I remember working myself to exhaustion for someone who saw me as disposable. So I pulled her aside on her second day and said something Martin never told me. Your ideas matter. Your work matters. You matter. And no one here will ever take credit for what you build. She looked relieved, like she'd been bracing for something else. Maybe that's how you change an industry. Not by destroying the old guard, but by building something better and teaching the next generation that loyalty and merit aren't weaknesses. I'm 33 now. My office has floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. On my desk sits that team player certificate Martin gave me years ago, right next to the Entrepreneur of the Year award. I keep both as reminders. One of who I was when I let someone else define my worth, and one of who I became when I stopped asking permission to be excellent. Last week, a reporter asked if I'd ever forgive Martin. I thought about it carefully before answering. Forgiveness implies he's still relevant to my story. He's not. He was a chapter 1 closed when I started writing my own book. Yesterday, I got an email from a young woman who'd just been fired despite strong performance. How did you do it? She asked. How did you turn rejection into this? I'm meeting her for coffee next week. I'll tell her what I wish someone had told me. That being fired isn't the end of your story unless you let it be. That the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor by removing themselves from your future. That success isn't about proving your former boss wrong. It's about proving yourself right. I pulled Martin's company out of debt, and he replaced me with his pet intern. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it forced me to discover what I was capable of building when I stopped building for someone else. The conference room doesn't feel like a fishbowl anymore. It feels like a launch pad. And I'm just getting started.